One top law enforcement official told us that an investigating committee of the U.S. Congress in 1988 heard enough evidence of North's drug smuggling to send him to jail for the rest of his life. In America, being connected, of course, means never having to say you're sorry. And we like what former CIA pilot and lawyer Gary Idle said to us about North. Going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than going to a car wash makes you a car. And then there's the King Air 200, like this one, tying Barry Seal to George W. Bush. While Barry Seal's ties to former President Bush have been well known for years, the most talked about event in Seal's life concerns the persistent rumor that Barry had videotaped a hastily aborted DEA cocaine sting in which were caught George Bush's two sons, George W. and Jeb, caught picking up kilos of cocaine at a Florida airport. We have not been able to prove this persistent allegation, but the search for proof turned up something just as shocking. The King Air used in the alleged sting went from being flown in drug smuggling missions by Barry Seal to later becoming the favorite airplane of Texas Governor George W. Bush. As Bogey might have put it, of all the planes in all the world, he had to fly in mine. And the owners of the King Air, in between Barry and George W. Bush, all had ties to the Bush family and were involved in some of the most notorious and unpunished financial frauds of the 1980s. And this one King Air reveals, like nothing else we've seen, the bipartisan nature of this scandal. We discovered a note in Barry Seal's own handwriting, revealing that the man who originally gave this plane to Seal was a close associate of Charles Manat, the national chairman during the early 80s of the Democratic Party. We remembered a curious incident from the 1984 Democratic Convention when Walter Mondale, the party's presidential nominee, was prevented from choosing his own man as party chairman, the presidential candidate's traditional prerogative. They wouldn't let him replace Charles Manat.
When the Democratic Convention was called to order this afternoon, the gavel was in the hands of Democratic National Committee Chairman Charles Manat. As party chairman, the job of calling the convention to order was rightfully his. As Sandra Van Oker reports, over the weekend, the job very nearly went to someone else.
The formalities began smoothly enough. But behind the facade, there was discord. The result of Walter Mondale's attempt this weekend to dump Californian Charles Manat as National Party chairman and replace him with Georgia State Chairman Burt Lance. When reaction from party leaders was so fiercely negative, Mondale backed off.
Could Manat have been just too good a fundraiser to be replaced? Oil companies, we've learned, make excellent drug money laundering vehicles. Sources told us that this man, Democratic power broker Richard Benveniste, had incorporated a Trinity Oil or Trinity Energy to launder money for his client Barry Seal. This gray-haired lawyer is the same man who defended Bill Clinton on the Whitewater Committee, the same committee which was haunted by the ghost of Barry Seal, according to the Wall Street Journal. We discovered that back in the early 80s, he represented both Barry Seal and Bill Clinton. We found an oil company called Trinity Energy that was sold by Barry's partner, attorney Michael Roy Fugler, for $22 million to a shadowy company suspected of being controlled by none other than Arkansas kingpin Jackson Stevens. We also traced the Trinity Energy, a Delaware-listed company, to the phone number of a company formed by former Pentagon officials called ICF Kaiser International, whose chairman, a man who had sat on its board for over 9 years, was former Congressman Tony Coelho, who resigned from Congress rather than face an ethics probe.
Congressional Democrats awoke to even more unexpected headlines today. The number 3 man in the House leadership, California Congressman Tony Coelho, has also decided to quit. Deborah Potter has our report.
It was a stunning surprise. The number 3 Democrat in the House, Tony Coelho, calling it quits rather than face a protracted investigation of his financial dealings.
Today, Tony Coelho was the head of Al Gore's presidential campaign. Why would Gore put someone so tainted in so visible a position? Maybe Coelho's good at fundraising too. Just how deep does this scandal go? A block off Bourbon Street in New Orleans is Royal Street, since the 1830s home to pricey galleries and antique shops. This elegant gallery belongs to a man named Dave Dixon, Known as one of Louisiana's most prominent citizens, and intimate of governors for decades, Dixon is locally revered as the father of the Louisiana Superdome. And for decades, this man, Dave Dixon, was also the CIA handler of the person known as the most successful drug smuggler in American history, Barry Seal. And at the trial of Clay Shaw, the only man ever charged in the murder of our president, Dave Dixon was a character witness for the accused. But the truly saddest part of this whole scandal is the way our free press has looked the other way. They called Seal's killing a gangland-style murder, but Barry Seal was not murdered by the Medellin cartel. The cover story that Jorge Ochoa, head of the cartel, caused Seal to be murdered in a contract killing is as much a big lie as anything ever churned out of Nazi propaganda mills during World War II. Incredibly, we discovered that on the night Barry Seal was slain, 3 other top lieutenants of the Medellin cartel were also murdered.
Our lead story, Metro News has uncovered some new information in the investigation into the assassination of Barry Seal. Reporter Dana Kay has the story.
Metro News has learned that there were a total of 4 drug-related killings the same day Barry Seal was gunned down here in Baton Rouge. And all of them seem to have been connected to the same drug ring operated out of Colombia. Metro News reported last night that a Colombian named Pablo Carrera was shot and killed in Colombia the same night Barry Seal was gunned down in Baton Rouge by a professional hit squad. Carrera was identified as the number 2 man in the Colombian drug organization headed by Jorge Ochoa. Metro News has now learned that 2 other Ochoa associates were shot to death at the same time. Another Colombian, Pablo Achilla, was executed in Colombia, and the 4th Ochoa associate to die was a woman identified only as Barbara. She was killed in Miami.
Who killed Seal? Just 10 days before he died, in a typical display of the fearlessness for which he was justly famous, he threatened to expose the gun running and drug smuggling that flourished in Mena, Arkansas. The man he threatened, then Vice President George Bush. All 3 of the guys on trial, Richard Sharpstein, the Miami attorney for one of the Colombians convicted, told us, all told their attorneys that once they reached the U.S., their actions were directed by a military officer, whom they very quickly figured out to be Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Barry Seal died for a simple reason, a reason which redeems him somewhat in our eyes. He was getting ready to talk. There's more, much more, to this story than we have time for here. It's in our book, Barry and the Boys. And a full airing of the Mena drug scandal can be found in our 2-hour special, The Secret Heartbeat of America. You can receive either or both by priority mail by calling the phone number shown at the end of this show. But we want to close with something we heard from someone who was just a small child when JFK was murdered, his son John. At a press conference announcing George magazine, he was asked if he would use his new publication to probe his father's assassination. No, he said, too much time has passed for anything effective to be done. Time, he said, is the great enemy of the truth. Meaning that by the time the public had figured out that John Kennedy was murdered by people who shot their way into power, just like Hitler's Nazis did, it was too late to do anything about it. Time is the great enemy of the truth. By the time we figure out that they've been lying to us about who controls the drug trade, they'll all be rich beyond measure.